currently working from home, I got like 2 TVs in the back. So I put one on like, one you can put it on like a certain hole, and then you can do the other one where it's the actual broadcast.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'll have the Masters on for the next 4 days.
It's actually a great, right? This time of year is great for sports because you just concluded the March Madness tournament.
Yep,
Then you got the Masters, you got spring baseball.
that's
I
right.
mean, it's just a fun season to be a sports fan.
NBA playoffs will kick off.
Yeah.
It'll
Yep.
it'll be
Yep.
football before we know it. But
Absolutely.
Sung, man, it is good to have you on the podcast, and I'm glad I pushed record because me and you have already been chatting away for about 15 minutes, talking about all kinds of things and having a great conversation. And so, man, thank you. You and I connected a few weeks ago just from a simple LinkedIn connection, and I appreciate you responding back because it's an honor to have you on here.
It's great to be here, Chris. And yeah, now listening and understanding the platform that you've created for guys to kind of come around books, to build a community around books, and just your passion and desire to have more people, more men reading earlier in their lives. Love it. I love everything about it. So excited to be here, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, appreciate it, man. Appreciate it. But no, man, I want to talk about your book. And you were just explaining you're about to head out on a book tour across the country, really for the rest of the year. And I'm curious to know, Sung, you have a very decorated military background as well, which I'd love for you to talk about. But in your book, we've got it on the Books4Guys website already,
Awesome.
Leadernomics. But tell your story. Tell your story of growing up, getting into the military and spending many, many years there. And then what led you to writing your book?
So without trying to go back too far, I suppose. So my parents were born in South Korea. They left after the Korean War and came to the States in the early 70s. So we were kind of the first major wave of Korean immigrants coming into America, settled into Chicago. And that's where I was raised and grew up. And throughout my time in Chicago, like maybe the two things I remember most is one, loving sports. So I was a sports junkie, Cubs, Bears, Bulls, Blackhawks. And then on top of being a sports junkie in high school, I got into gymnastics. And it was ironic because I really loved baseball. I wanted to play baseball. But going into high school, I was 4'10", 90 pounds. And so there wasn't a single coach that was going to look at me for high school ball. And I know you played some type of sport. I'm not sure what sport you played.
I'm the football guy.
You're a football guy.
I'm all football. Yep.
Yeah. So I was the size of that football when I was entering high school. And so I had a couple of friends that were on the gymnastics team. And they said, "Hey, son, you should try out for gymnastics. You're like the perfect size." And I kind of took that as a gut punch because I really wanted to play baseball. But then I went out, just thought I'd give it a try. And the first day of practice, I learned a few little tricks, and I thought this is pretty cool. And then I came back again and again and again. And next thing I knew, 4 years later, I was in the state finals for pommel horse and parallel bars, and then got some offers to college. And one of the schools that gave me an offer was the United States Air Force Academy. Now, at that time, I had no interest in going into the military. But my dad, being a product of the Korean War, he had an incredibly fond memory and experience with the American soldier when he was at a refugee camp in Korea. And he's never forgotten that moment of getting some candy from that soldier and more importantly, getting a little dose of hope. And he always would share that story with me and my sisters about his love for America, his love for the American military. And so when it came time to go to college, and I had a choice to make, he just really impressed upon me, hey, why don't you think about going to like a West Point or Naval Academy or the Air Force Academy? And so went out to Colorado Springs, Colorado for a recruiting trip. And being from Chicago where there's no mountains, I saw Rocky Mountains for the first time, fell in love and loved the mountains, loved the fact that I could do D1 gymnastics, loved the fact that dad was going to be happy. And so next thing I know, I'm in the military. And little did I know that I entered day one and I'm needing to shine my boots, iron my shirt. I'm getting yelled at and I'm thinking to myself, what in the world did I get myself into? That's how my military life began. And one thing led to the next. Sometimes this is how the military works, and sometimes this is how life works. I said, hey, I'm going to do this amount of time and get out and go do something else. But it became one opportunity, one leadership experience, one incredible destination after the next. And next thing I knew, 25 years had passed, and then I made a career out of it. And so that was my life in the military. I called myself a CFO with body armor because I was always doing some type of work with resources and getting money and resources to the warfighter. And then basically the last 4 years, I started writing my book. And my book came from my education degree was always in economics, and fell in love with economics because I really viewed it as a framework for making decisions in life and leadership. And it kind of carried me through my whole leadership career in the military as a foundational way to look at decisions. So spoke on it a lot, talked to government, industry, military. And then I had a bunch of people start asking me, hey, when are you going to write a book? And so I began the journey about 4 years ago, published it this past September. And now here we are going around and trying to tell people about Leadernomics.
Yeah. No, I love that, man. And I'm so glad you shared that. I remember I grew up in an area where sports was big, and I remember there was a kid I played against in football that went to the Air Force Academy, and I remember his mom was actually my English teacher. That's how I knew him. But I played against him, so we weren't really friends, but I knew of him, and he was a really good athlete. And he went there to do, is it decathlon sports? He played football too, but decathlon I think was how he ended up there. But I remember just thinking, well, and learning how tough it is to even get into the Air Force Academy. And so I learned real quick that if you go there, it's a big deal. And so I think it's really cool. I mean, you did a lot to get there, so I don't want to undersell that because that is a big deal. And
So,
it's really cool.
what's funny, Chris, is that when I went there the year after the original Top Gun was released, right? The Top Gun was so, everybody and their sister wanted to go to
Sure.
either the Naval Academy or Air Force Academy to go fly jets, right?
Yeah.
And so yeah, it had a little bit of that flair about it, which is also why I thought, oh yeah, I'll go there, man. Maybe I could be like a Tom Cruise or something.
Yeah.
But no, it was quite the experience.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, go a little deeper into your book. And specifically, you talk about how economics, you use it personally to shape a lot of the decisions you do, and you think others should do the same. Dig in a little deeper on that, and what specifically, like, what's going on economically that we should pay attention to help whatever direction we need to go in life. How do you correlate that and put that together?
A great question. So the book was really birthed out of the classroom. So after becoming an officer in the Air Force, I think it was about 5 years after I became an officer in the Air Force Academy, my alma mater, asked me to come and teach economics, right? And so I went back to my stomping grounds and I started teaching and had to teach from the textbook. And every textbook, first economics 101 class will generally start out with your basic definitions, your graphs of supply and demand, and it will show you the math and the equations. And by the time you've gotten through about 2 weeks worth of class, you've already lost about 80% of the students, right? They've kind of checked out because unless they're going to major in business or
Yeah.
economics, they're like, okay, this is a core class. Just teach me what I need to know. But they've kind of checked out from the depth and the foundation of economics. And they just want to kind of get through the math and the equations. And so they never get through the corridor of what I like to say is the human endeavor of economics. Well, that changed, Chris, when I was teaching there from '00 to '03. We had 9/11, right? And literally overnight, I walked into that classroom of college students that used to be bright, happy, joyful, silly, and it became a very somber, sober group of young adults who were obviously going to a military academy, getting ready to become young officers and leaders in the United States Air Force. And you could just see the look on their faces. Some of them, personal sorrow because they had family members or friends that they lost in the Twin Towers. But many of them just kind of confused about what they're facing in life. And no textbook was going to hit their hearts, let alone their minds, right? And so I made a pivot and I decided to take that entire semester after 9/11 and teach economics strictly from the perspective of storytelling and personal memoir, right? Because I really wanted to connect and I didn't want them to lose the forest from the trees. I wanted them to get the heart of economics. Well, that class resonated. In fact, it became the most popular class at the academy at that time. And then I started speaking on this way of economics regularly. And then I coined it Leadernomics, right? And one just really quick story is one of my students, while post 9/11, had brought up this article that he read, and there was a movie made on it. It was called Worth, and Michael Keaton is in the movie. It's actually a very good movie. But the article that he mentioned to me was a compensation. It's called the VCF, the Victim Compensation Fund, that Congress had developed post 9/11 as a means of goodwill and compensation for family members and victims of lost loved ones and also those who had been injured.
Yep. I saw that movie a couple years ago, so I know
Right.
which one you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that fund, the optics of it, you would think would be good, but the optics weren't that good for two reasons. One, because behind the scenes, they created that fund as a means of goodwill so that family members and relatives would not sue the airline industry. So that was kind of a hidden agenda. And then the other thing is that the fund wasn't unlimited, right? It was capped. And so the way they went about determining who would get how much in terms of payout, it came down to data. And they would throw the data into some type of formula like actuary scientists do, and then out comes a number. So if you're a janitor in the 9/11 events and you lose your life, right? You're a 50-year-old janitor. They're going to take your age, your job, your salary, your health. They're going to throw that into the database, and out comes maybe a 6-digit figure, and they're going to take that check to the lost loved ones. But if you were a 35-year-old executive that went to Harvard, they're going to throw all that into the database, and out comes an 8-figure check, 9-figure check, who knows? And they're going to take that to the family, right? So there was this huge disparity. One life lost, another life lost. Someone gets a 6-figure check, someone gets an 8-figure check. But even aside from that disparity and kind of the poor optics surrounding that, the even greater disparity is that there's going to be no lost loved one that receives either check and says, that's about right.
Yeah.
Right? Because they lost their mom, their dad, their brother, their sister, their son, their daughter. It's priceless. And so a student said to me, sir, how do we reconcile this? How do we reconcile this pricing of life when we all know inside that our loved ones are priceless? How does the market, how does economics reconcile that infinite gap? And I said, well, that's a great question, right?
Yeah.
That's what we're going to journey. And I'll tell you something, economics has something to say about that. Economics has an area of economics called positive economics, which is what is, right? What is, what do we see? What does the market tell us about price? And then there's a whole side of economics called the normative. What should be, right? So just because there's a supply and demand for human organs, should there be a market for human organs, right? Big gap. What is versus what should be. And economics is constantly bridging that gap. Well, you know what else is bridging that gap between what is and what should be? Priceless, impersonal, personal leadership. Leadership. That's what leaders do, right? Leaders bridge that gap from what is to what should be.
Yeah.
And so the two worlds, leadership and economics, they come together perfectly. That's the essence of Leadernomics. And so that whole semester, I was telling my students through personal stories and memoirs how that gap gets bridged through an economic framework and through economic principles. That's Leadernomics.
Yeah. Dang, Sung, I've never heard it broken down like that. And obviously that's why you've you've written a book and you're teaching this is to put that out there because I've never once heard any professor or anyone that I've been around in regard to economics talk about the leadership aspect and that being the bridge between the what is and what should be. You always hear, a market, here's where it's priced, here's where the data says it should be, but that's just numbers, but there's a lot more to it than just data. There's a lot of things in there that are, I don't know, like you said, it's hard to put a number on, a family member, what they're worth, because, yeah, you're right. They're priceless. And so, how do you do that? And so, your approach to this, how did the light bulb click for you personally to where you came up with this, not formula, lack of a better term, but this process of understanding that leadership binds these two together? Did somebody guide you and teach you that? Or how did you figure that out and say, this is something that needs to be taught. This is a way we need to approach this and instead of just data and numbers, but there's more to it. How did you figure that out?
I think part of it is through just my own kind of reading and understanding and development through the principles of economics and how economics guided me and my decisions. But I definitely also saw it throughout 25 years in the military, where that's something very interesting to me is that in the military, almost all of us are given uniform training, consistent leadership development throughout our career. It's not like somebody's getting far superior type of leadership training and another one's getting a lesser form of. We all kind of go through the same courses and the same classes. And so then how is it, Chris, that we're all going through kind of the similar type of development, similar ranks, similar uniforms, similar core values, but our leadership styles, approaches, and philosophies, how is it so different? And if it's not different, why is it manifested so differently? Why do I have this general who behaves this way and I have this general who behaves that way? Both of them are effective, perhaps, but is one far more effective and why? Right. So I used to like to give this one, and I actually talk about it in the book. I had the privilege of working at the Pentagon from 2003 to 2006, and I call that whole season of my 2003 to 2006 life at the Pentagon as the tale of two generals, because I worked for two generals simultaneously. One was relational, one was transactional. One was very much in tune with how to get the most out of people. The other one was in tune with how to get the most for themselves. And it was very clear that both were successful, both got the mission done, and both were on a track toward higher rank and higher platforms. But if you asked any one of us underneath those two generals, right? If you asked either of us, what do you think? Unanimously, all of us would have pointed to one person and said, that's my general. Other person was the same rank, same training, same development, flew the same type of jets, but no one would have said, that's my general. This one, everybody would have knocked down walls, climbed fences, low crawled through the mud for that general in a heartbeat. And so it's amazing the amount of performance and productivity that can be altered and grown by the type of leadership presence. One that is constantly taking what is to what should be, and the other one who's constantly settling for what is. And when I say settling for what is, that other general pretty much got what they asked for because they asked a lot, and that's what they got. This other general, they cared about us, and they cared about what we could deliver, and we did so much more, better, faster for that general. So it's such a dichotomy, even though the training was very similar.
Yeah. The two words that come to mind, they're just circling, is like there's a lot of psychology and philosophy, the way you think of things and do things that are intertwined into this leadership, because you're sitting there describing two different people. I've experienced that. I've experienced two different leaders, exact the same. One that's more relationship, people, caring. I'd run through a brick wall for them. The one that's a little more, and I always use the term a little more militaristic. Beat you down until you get what they want. I hated it. Still did the work though, so it got done. But the philosophy that people take in their own definition of how they think they should lead. And it goes back to that book I was telling you. I was reading about Tony Dungy. His coaching approach, so different. He never cussed at players. He never yelled at players. But then you see a Nick Saban and he's cussing and yelling, two different things, but both leaders and both getting things done. So you just, and I don't know how that correlates, but I'm just sitting there thinking of all these different things and how you're describing it. And there's a lot to it.
I think it's interesting because both very different styles can both be incredibly effective. But I would ask the question in terms of just not only in terms of effective for the short term, but in terms of long-term development, right? Because that's a part of what we get into when we talk about Leadernomics and going from what is to what should be. It's not for the momentary success. It's not for the immediate delivery and performance. There's also the question of legacy, of multiplying, of what do we want to spread in the way of influence that even when you're not in the room, it will carry far beyond that duration and that person and that time, right? And generally speaking, what we have found is that love, or what I would say compassionate, caring, people-centered leadership, right, tends to go a lot further than directive, fearful, almost a bit of a commanding type of leadership presence in somebody's life. Because the two can maybe result in same outcomes in the immediate, but the long-term path of either are quite different.
Is there a median that has to be found though? Because I'm sitting here thinking like, if somebody's just all caring and love, but doesn't really get you to do what needed to be done, but also you've got this other person who can get you what needs to be done, but you kind of maybe don't do it as well because you don't care as much. Is there a median that's the ideal leadership aspect where both of those can correlate and be together at the same time? Or
Yeah, so I do think there's an ebb and flow, right? So I mean, I think the tone and the way, and this is part of economics too, right? Because a big part of economics is about human behavior, right? It's the study of how humans behave and how humans make decisions when they're faced with allocating resources under scarcity, right? So scarcity is universal. You and I deal with scarcity every single day, whether it's time, money, assets, gifts, talents, emotions, energy. We never have all or unlimited amounts of any of that. And so how do we make decisions when we're dealing with scarcity, right? And so economics studies human behavior. What motivates you? What determines your preferences? What incentivizes you and drives your behavior toward a particular decision, right? So as leaders, if we understand that, if I understand that someone motivates and is incentivized by a swift kick in the butt, then that might need to be the way I convey and communicate with that person. On the other hand, if there's a person over there that deals much better with an attentive, compassionate, listening heart, right, and who gives a delivery of feedback in a much more gentle way, that's going to incentivize and motivate them in a very different manner, right? Because that resonates. So I think it's the understanding of human behavior and what incentivizes each person toward maximum outcomes, and then a leader who's attuned to that, right? Because they're attuned to economics, right? They're attuned to preferences, motivations, and incentives. They know how to address people differently. They're not going to address everybody like a homogeneous robot, right? They're going to address people as people, and people are different. So that's how we do it. And I think that's kind of the median. And then if there's one thing I could say, Chris, about care, care sometimes it gets overused or gets a bad rap. And I would say the most caring leadership, often and compassionate, often centers around truth. right? It centers around honesty. So if compassion means withholding truth, that's not very compassionate. That's not very caring. That's not very loving. And so, one of the greatest things that we do in leadership is we give feedback and we give constructive criticism when necessary. We don't withhold that. We don't refrain from that. We don't cowardice from that as leaders. And we've got to do that. And is that not caring? No. No. The delivery
Yeah.
may not be caring, but if we deliver it properly and we do it from the perspective of truth and honesty to serve that member to become a better member, and that's about as compassionate as you can get.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, this is powerful stuff, Sung. This is good and powerful stuff. As you embark on your book tour and you're going out and you're speaking with people and people are requesting you to come talk to them, and as this grows and your platform grows to be able to share more and more about this message, what do you hope is obtained from your book and from your message? If nothing else, what is one piece of information or one nugget that you hope people take away after they hear you speak or they read your book?
Great question.
'Cause there's a
One,
lot too. I mean, there's so much to dive in on that. I mean, you've got my head spinning, but I'm just thinking like, what's maybe the first thing, the easiest thing for someone to pick up on and take away from it?
sure. I'll give you two, and they're fairly quick. One, I hope that anybody who hasn't had economics, that this would whet their appetite and that they would start from a human endeavor perspective, not from the math, not from the graphs, not from how much money can I make, but can they see and desire what's the human part of economics? And can I start with that? And Leadernomics will start you with that, right? So if you haven't had it, I hope it whets your appetite. If you've had it and didn't like it because of all of those reasons of math and graph, I hope you give it a second chance. Take another look, see what the human endeavor of economics is about. The second thing that I was saying, it gets back to what I said earlier about leaders bridging that gap between what is and what should be. I intentionally did this book tour in a very interesting way. I'm an independent author, I'm an indie author. I don't have a top 5 publisher. I'm a former military guy entering into the public civilian world. Nobody knows who I am. I'm not no 4-star general that was on CNN or C-SPAN, right? And so, who's this Seung Paik guy? What's this book about? And why should I, as an independent bookstore, welcome this indie author? And so, Chris, when I first started out, and I started in California, called about 50 bookstores, I think I got 50 rejects. Made sense. And then that's when I kind of had an epiphany. And I said, you know what? I think I need to take the book and apply the book exactly in the manner that I apply it for leadership to bookstores. And so I changed the narrative. I called the bookstores and I said, hey, listen, I want to come visit your bookstore. I have a book called Leadernomics. And the theme of it is taking things that we see at what is, but they really should be seen at what should be. And I can't think of a better local institution than the bookstore. Bookstores, right? Nobody buys a bookstore to get rich. Nobody makes a ton of money selling used and new books at a local neighborhood bookstore. So why do they exist? How do they survive? Well, you know why they exist and they survive? Because they have a relationship with the community, and that community views that bookstore as what? Priceless. They view it from a standpoint of having a value that exceeds market value,
Yeah.
right? And so I called them. I said, I saw your bookstore. I researched it. I love it. I would love to come visit it and tell you about Leadernomics. But really, what I want to do is I want to write a story that captures your relationship with your community. All of a sudden, those 50 no's turned into about 49 yeses. And I started going to every single bookstore. And you know what I found, Chris? I found that every single bookstore, local independent bookstore that is surviving and thriving today, it's because that community sees that bookstore not as what is, but as what should be. And when people see things as what should be, it turns the what is, the market, it turns it upside down. That's what happens. And so my second takeaway through this whole journey and this whole Leadernomics is I want people to be able to see through the human endeavor lens of economics so that they can see things first through what should be. And when they do, it will flip what is upside down, both in life and in leadership.
Yeah. Love that. Love that. Just two more questions for you, Sung. One of them is just your overall view of how it could be anyone, but I'm just thinking of America in general on how we approach economics. Because again, we're fed all the numbers and data and charts, and what you're putting out there is again focusing on the human element of all this as well. It should be almost more important, probably. Do we, as a country, it doesn't seem like we do a very good job of that.
Mm.
And I'm a guessing that's why, you're sharing this message to try and like maybe get that thought a little more, give it some more weight rather than just being transactional in numbers and not having that emotion tied to it. But just what's your opinion on the current state of our country and our overall economic views and where we're at? Is it in a dangerous spot? Are we okay and we just need the pendulum to swing a little bit more to the other direction? Or just what's your opinion on that?
Man. So
That was a heavy question for you
no,
right there.
it's a great question. It's I mean, like this is the kind of stuff I wish I had in the classroom for like a whole semester and I can just talk to students about this kind of stuff. But back when economics first had its what I would say its underpinnings in America, the whole discipline was intended to serve the mainstream citizen, right? It was not a subject that was left for the high tower of academia. It was intended to serve the public, to serve the farmer, the agriculture person, the rural citizen, not just the urban elite, right? The whole concept of economics was to show, hey, this is going to help you understand how policies and how decisions can help not only your community and yourself, but society at large. And then as years have passed, uh, economics has, I think, gotten more and more rigorous in the academic intellectual elite realm to where, like, if you were to open up a journal, an econ journal at the collegiate or graduate level, with the exception of the abstract, the one paragraph abstract at the beginning, 99% of the people won't be able to read the next 10 pages because it's all covered in mathematical formulas and theory. And so the whole practical aspect of economics, I believe, has completely changed. And with it, if you think about it, because it's almost monopolized at an intellectually elite level or at think tanks, right? The common layperson citizen hasn't been equipped with the principles in a very practical way in which to look at relationships, their family, their community, and policies that impact our nation, right? They should be equipped with the basic principles to do that. And so, how do I think that's important for how things are today? I think if that were the case, I think if people understood the basic human relational aspects of economic core principles, it would alter the way in which people not only see people, but it would alter the way in which people see relationships. And if you think about the market, the economy as a market, Chris, it's all relationships. Suppliers don't exist without consumers. Producers don't exist, right, without suppliers. You don't have labor without employers, right? And you don't have leaders without followers. Everything in the marketplace exists in a relationship context, a human context, human to human. And so that's why I believe that, again, we have to go back to teaching economics from a human endeavor, right? Which is going to alter the way people see relationships, which is going to alter the way people relate and have market relationships with each other. And that'll change the economy.
Yeah. There's a lot of moving parts that have to come together to make it an ideal space. It's interesting, son. This is something that just personally I find very interesting to learn about and how all these parts work together. what is, how can it be what should be, you know? Is it realistic in this particular area? Is it not? It's just it's all fascinating to learn about, and hear you speak about it, it's just it's fantastic. I'm learning so much from you.
Yeah, I mean, I like to say, I mean, Chris, I didn't even ask when we first started, but are you do you have a family? Are you married and have kids?
Married and a four-legged dog.
Love it.
That's my immediate family anyway.
You got a four-legged dog too, but I will tell you, I cannot tell you the amount human-centered, human endeavor economics, the core principles. I cannot tell you how often it has helped guide me in the decisions of our marriage
Yeah,
and in how
interesting.
I relate with my wife. It has guided how I make decisions and how I perceive the decisions and the impact to my children and how I've raised my kids. And so, if you can call a household an economy, you can begin to see how has the welfare and the social maximizing well-being of this little peck household been because of their understanding of economics. And now I just extend that to a community, and then I extend that to society, right? That's the power of economics. If you understand the foundational human endeavor concepts, and then you're able to bring that to each relationship, it will alter the marketplace. It will alter how we perceive value. We will no longer see things strictly from price. We'll begin to see things from a sense of inherent value and priceless worth. And the minute we do that, it changes decisions, it changes relationships, and it changes policy.
Yeah. No, that's good stuff. You're gonna have me and you're gonna have me having a conversation with my wife later, planning out our economics of our households. So I got one last question for you. This has
Yeah.
been amazing. But I ask everybody this that comes on the podcast, just from a books for guys perspective. I'm always interested to know, and this may be a hard question, but what is a book or two that has meant a lot to you personally or professionally? And what's a book or two that you like to recommend to others?
Boy, so many. I'll say one. There's a book that I love. It's called The Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis.
I've heard of those.
Yeah, I was gonna give a really classic. I was gonna say Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky, but that's a long book. It's a deep read, so a much shorter book, but I think an equally probing look at the human heart and the human motives, incentives, priorities, and how deceptive things can be in life and in leadership. I think this book called The Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis, it's a gold mine. It's short, it's enjoyable, it's an easy read, but it's one of those books where after every page and every chapter, in particular, if you're doing it as a book club with a bunch of guys, there are so many aspects of questions and probing and thoughts that can come forward from a book like this. And it's one of those books that not only have you thinking quite deeply, but it will challenge your character to grow. So that's one of my favorite books. And again, before we do sign off, Chris, I just want to tell you, I love your platform. I love what you're doing. As an author, I've come to learn a little bit more about the book industry. Not a lot of people buy hard copy books anymore. Even if they buy them, I think 30 or 40% of books bought, you're not going to believe this, they never get opened. And then if it's a nonfiction book, this stat blew me away. If it's a nonfiction book, they buy it, they open it, but then if it's a nonfiction, only 10% will read it from front to cover, cover to cover, right? So it takes 10 buyers to have one book read. And, there's something to be said. I don't know if that speaks to the generation. I don't know if that speaks to poor writing. I don't know what that exactly speaks to, but there is something about your platform encouraging and inspiring and just kind of giving another avenue for people to gather, especially guys, to gather around books, to fellowship around books, to challenge each other with books, to laugh through stories and lessons. It's priceless. What you're doing is what I call the what should be, right? That's what should be. And it's priceless. You can't put a price tag on that. You're flipping the market inside out with what you're doing. And so that's why I appreciate and I value this conversation and your platform.
Yeah. Well, that means a lot coming from you. And yeah, if there's That's the whole purpose and mission behind these conversations. It's one thing to get recommended a book, it's another to hear a conversation and really get your interest going. And there's been several podcasts I've listened to where I go buy a book because I actually listened to the person talk about it, and I was like, oh, I gotta get that guy's book. Like, I'm so interested in this person.
Exactly.
There was that connection that was built, and so that's the whole purpose behind this. And so we're proud to have your book on the
Awesome.
website and proud to spotlight it. And man, wishing you the best of luck on your book tour, and
Thank
hope you
you.
get to meet and talk with many, many people and have a major impact with it. And man, we're here to help and support any way we can. And man, thank you so much for doing this. It means a lot.
Love it. And if you do a book club with Leadernomics, I might join in.
Heck yeah, we'll do it.
All right.
Thanks, Sung.
You bet.